So, hello and welcome to our Ocarino Behind the Scenes webinar. Today, I will present shortly what the Ocarino does or is, but then we have a special guest today. So, my name is Jonas Trüstedt. I'm a consultant at ATIX, the company behind Ocarino. And today with me, I have Quirin Pump, who is a developer from our engineering team. So if you have any questions, please ask them. There is the possibility to ask questions. We will try to answer them. And before we start with to talk about what our engineering team does and what the important things behind the scenes in the engineering department are, I will just start with a short wrap up why you should use Ocarino and what the benefits are. So, Ocarino will help you in several ways. And as you probably know, if you have to manage some IT infrastructure, to do everything manually is very consuming, and it's easy to make some errors if you have to do the same task 50 times in a row. So in the end, you want to automate those things which are repetitive tasks and always the same. And with that, you also get a standard environment which is reproducible and will have a lot of benefits. And for those tasks, one thing is the deployment. Usually you have some kind of virtualization layer in your environment to set up virtual machines, but it can also be for bare metal machines or cloud instances. And those deployments are usually the same, and Ocarino can do these deployments for you in an automated way. So you only have to specify one which operating system you want to have, and Ocarino then can do the rest of it. And after you deployed your machine, you want to configure it. You can also configure your machine during the installation, but if you have the use case that you need to change something of your configuration afterwards, you also won't do this manually. You want to have a centralized way to manage your configuration, and there are different tools on the market which can be included in Ocarino and used for that. For example, Puppet, Ansible, and SaltStack. And if you already have it, you can integrate your existing environment into Ocarino to manage your configuration uh, of your servers. And then if you have to change something because you have a new DNS server, then you can just change the variable inside your Ocarino, click on deploy, and all machines will have the change in some minutes, and you can turn off your old name server. The other thing, which is even more important, is the patch management. You want to have an overview what updates are available for your operating systems, which of those updates are considered as security updates and are important. And you want to do this for all those operating systems which are available in your infrastructure. The good thing is Ocarino can manage all of them. So if you have Ubuntu or Debian or CentOS or Alma or Rocky or Red Hat or Oracle or SUSE, Ocarino can manage the patches of all those operating systems. And there are even some more of them with more specialized use cases like Amazon Linux and things like that. So in the end, you also want to make sure that all those patches you provide are tested. So you can also have something as release management. So you want to make sure that those patches you tested or you develop your application on is the same patches which are available in the productive environment, so that you don't end up in some dependency hell of certain applications. And in the end, Orcharhino is that tool where you can manage the whole life cycle of your server. So starting from the deployment to the configuration management, the patch and release management, and you can even delete your virtual machines if you do not need them anymore. Then there's the possibility to extend those features even more by adding certain plugins to Orcharhino. And what ATIX does is we provide and engineer the Orcharhino, and we have several departments which work with Orcharhino. So we have a consulting department where I am part of. So we help our customers to find the right way to configure Orcharhino in their environment. Then we provide the possibility to have a training, so to manage your Orcharhino on your own. We have a support. This is important if you want to provide an enterprise product for your customers, and we want to make sure that you don't have any issues. And if there is an issue, we want to help you as fast as possible. And the other thing is we want to provide new features and bug fixes for Orcharhino and add even more things to it depending on what your use case is. So at the moment, we already support the patch management for all those Linux distributions. We can also deploy Windows servers. We can configure them with Puppet, SaltStack, and Ansible. We have different hypervisors, and the most prominent ones are probably VMware and Proxmox. And we have several cloud providers which can also be used with Orcharhino. And usually at this part, we will switch over to some demo part where I would explain you how certain things can be done in Orcharhino and how easy it is to use it. But today we have a different layout of this session. So we have someone of the engineering department with us. So let me switch over to Quirin. So let us start. What is the usual workday for the engineering department?
Okay.
What do
So
you do?
first of all, thanks and hello everyone. So what do we do all day? Well, in short, I guess we work on Orcharhino, but that's an overly broad answer to a broad question. The important thing to understand is that I guess Orcharhino is a downstream enterprise product based on the upstream Foreman and Catello open source ecosystem. So working on Orcharhino also entails working on those open source projects. And
so let me just jump in at that point. What is the difference between this downstream product and the open source project? So what is, how can I imagine
yes, that's a
the differences?
very good question. So, I mean, to the casual observer, there's sometimes sort of it might appear like Orcharhino is just Foreman and with Catello, but in green. And of course, to us as developers, that's a somewhat hurtful way of looking at it because, of course, we spend a lot of time and put a lot of work into turning those upstream projects into what we release as Orcharhino. And so there are some very significant differences. And essentially what I would, or how I would describe it is Orcharhino is the result of or any given Orcharhino release, I should say, is the result of a stabilization process of some given upstream Foreman and Catello release. So when we internally start using a new major Foreman or Catello version, we will first do that on a development branch, and already in the engineering department, we have some automated tests, and the developer who first rolls out that new instance with the new version for the first time will already start looking over it and find if anything broke or any problems with the new upstream open source release. And then after a while, so once we're happy and we merge that and start using it on our internal main branch, which is going to become the next orcharhino version, we will eventually pass that state along to our QA testers, and they will run a bunch more automated tests and also some manual tests. And we will also upgrade some of our productive internal demo systems that the consultants use, and then get feedback from the consulting department in sort of more real-world usage scenario. And so we then collect all of that feedback and identify all of, like, generally speaking, with every major Foreman or Catello upgrade, we will find various things that we consider to be critical release blocking bugs, and we will fix those before they ever are released to our customers. So that's one of the really big and important differences is, well, in the upstream open source project, you have lots of people working on the cutting edge of this open source project, putting in all kinds of new features, and which means the upstream releases always have a lot of churn, and where you have a lot of churn, you naturally also have bugs. So that's the first thing is.
But you probably want to do not only bug fixing, right? You will also add some new things.
Right. Yes. So yes, we do also do feature development, but maybe let me say one more thing about the difference between upstream and downstream product, also upstream open source and downstream product is so what the downstream product gives us is full control over the code base that we then package as orcharhino and release to our customers. And that's important because it's essentially a prerequisite for providing meaningful support subscriptions or support for orcharhino. So, like, for example, when a customer, say, has some critical issue or has some issue with their installation and they open a support ticket with ATIX, then we clearly can't say, yes, we're going to talk it over with the community, and if they think this is important and if they feel like we have provided a good bug fix, then maybe there will be a bug fix release in 4 to 6 weeks. So clearly we can't do that. So that's also another reason why we need to have the downstream product where we have that full control and where we can bring bug fix releases to our customers on our calendar. And finally, there's two more differences. So with orcharhino, we provide an installer that is essentially a wrapper around the upstream Foreman installer that does a lot of additional initial setup and configuration. And what we also provide is a well-tested upgrade path through the various upstream versions. So like I said, when we introduce a new Foreman or Catello version, we always introduce a specific state and eventually release that to our customers. And of course, part of that is testing the upgrade from each particular intermediary orcharhino version. Okay, and now back to your other question, features. We don't just do bug fixes, we also do feature work. And so one of the things we do is ATIX has developed as primary developer various Foreman plugins. So examples are application-centric deployment, then the snapshot management plugin, and also the SCC manager. And so those are all additions to Foreman that we provided that are both part of orcharhino and also part of the upstream open source project. And then this, I guess, the single largest sort of ATIX focus has been to add support for apt-based distributions, that is Ubuntu and Debian, to Catello's content management. And that is a very big change or feature that probably wouldn't exist without us.
But we also do some customer-specific integrations and features, right?
Yes, so sometimes, so that's another thing that will happen is if a customer, so I've spoken some of the big features now, the plugins we do and the Pulp Debian. And then, of course, there are many small features that we also do that just as the need arises, sort of small components, small features here and there in the larger upstream project. And that can certainly be at the request of customer feedback.
Okay, since you just mentioned Pulp is the part for the content management inside Catello, so everything we need to do the patch management and release management for Debian and Ubuntu. But since we also develop some features for Orcharhino, and you already said that Orcharhino is based on an upstream open source project, do those changes and features go back to the community? You already mentioned that those plugins are also available for Foreman, right?
The plugins are Foreman plugins, which means anyone who has a Foreman installation can install those plugins and use them, just like how they are included with Orcharhino and can be used by Orcharhino customers. But it also goes essentially for all the work we do. So generally speaking, everything we do is made available to the upstream project. So like for better or for worse, we are committed to the open source model, right? We want to be a good community member in the open source community. And we believe this benefits both us and the community. So the community gets the features we work on. And when we get those features into the upstream, then maintenance for those features, the long-term maintenance, becomes a community responsibility. So we benefit from that. And of course, we benefit from having that very large upstream open source project as our base that we work from.
Okay, so you just mentioned it is the plugins or features are made available for the community. So what does that look like, or what do you mean with make available? You just put them on your GitHub account and everyone can take it if he wants to, or
the ideal development process that we sort of have is, especially for feature work, is to work directly on the upstream project first. So on GitHub, so if there's a plugin, then it will have its own repository and we work on that repository. But if it's on Foreman or Catello itself or on Pulp, which is this backend component for the content management, we will work directly on the next main branch release for that upstream project. And ideally then have that reviewed by the community and have it merged and only then add it to Orcharhino. Now, I said that that's the ideal process. And the reason for that is because, like I said, if we can agree with the community on what version exactly should go into the upstream project, and that is reviewed and merged, then long-term maintenance becomes a community responsibility, and we can concentrate on further feature work and don't have to do so much maintenance. In the real world, it happens, or especially for large features, it can take a long time for those features to make it into the upstream main branch. So it's not unheard of to have upstream pull requests that are open for more than a year for major features. And so in practice, what we do is we will still start that work on the cutting edge upstream project, but we will often also, depending on our own internal roadmap and calendar and the needs of our enterprise customers, already add that feature to orcharhino before it has been fully integrated back into the upstream. So in that sense, orcharhino customers often get some major features that are primarily developed and maintained by ATIX sort of ahead of time as part of the orcharhino product. But in the long run, everything we do is also fed back into the upstream open source project.
So as far as I know, it's for the Debian Ubuntu content integration, also something with the errata management for those security patches, which are at the moment not
yeah, that's one
integrated
good
in upstream,
example.
right?
I mean, the whole Debian content management story is more of a story and huge feature set than just a single feature. And so parts of it have already been added to the upstream Cotello, but some parts of it are still in a draft state for the upstream project. So you mentioned the Debian and Ubuntu errata support. And that will probably remain in this sort of pull request status for some more time, because it's just a very large feature and there's a lot of design discussions around it. And we will eventually, us and the open source community, will need to do a real push of like trying to say, okay, we're in a good state now, and now we need to review everything, finish, like rebase it to the current upstream state, make sure everything works, review it all within a single upstream release cycle. And that's like how we would get it into the upstream. And that requires a sort of concentrated effort where both us and the upstream reviewers like set aside some time and do this all within that time frame of a single upstream release process. But yes, we're confident eventually it will go in there.
Okay. And it's available as an open pull request, right?
In that sense, the code is already available, but of course it would take sort of developer knowledge or like knowledge of how to set up development environments or hot patch your environment to actually use it. And of course, in that state, it is quite unstable because you're aiming at a moving target, right? New changes keep coming into the upstream project, and the pull request might not be on the newest master at any given time.
This is why for a stable environment, you want to have
exactly.
orcharhino.
So like I said, orcharhino always goes through that whole stabilization process before a new orcharhino version is ever released. And then also, like once we have done an orcharhino release, we can continue to support that state for a long time and continue to bring bug fixes and maybe even features, depending on what our requirements are, back to that stable state. Whereas the upstream community is always kind of keep working on that cutting edge where they bring in new features and sometimes things break and there's a lot of churn. And yeah, and so the orcharhino will usually always be several releases behind the newest major upstream release because of that stabilization process.
Okay. So then you already said that this Debian Ubuntu content management is probably by far the largest part which is developed at ATIX. And since there was a new Orcharhino version released last month where this pulp feature, which contains this content management, switched to a whole new version, which was, as far as I know, totally rewritten. Maybe you can tell us a bit more about this special work with this pulp integration and Debian.
Yeah, so so just in terms of terminology, I say Debian, but it's Debian and Ubuntu, so it's for apt-based distributions and package management. But yes, so that's one of the major features that is essentially developed by ATIX and by our engineering department. And the switch from Pulp 2 to Pulp 3 has been, or like you said, the Pulp community essentially decided that from Pulp 2 to Pulp 3, they were going to switch from Python 2 to Python 3, and they were going to switch from whatever framework they used for Pulp 2 to making it a Django app, and they were going to switch from using a MongoDB database backend to a Postgres database. And because of these complete changes in architecture, they decided, well, it was going to be a complete from scratch rewrite. So Pulp 3 and Pulp 2 do not share a single line of code. And it was clear from the beginning that if we weren't going to do that for the Pulp Debian part, so the Pulp Debian plugin, then no one was going to do it, and that Debian support would just be dropped from the upstream project from Cotello. And so we spent a long time, it's been years in the coming, creating that Pulp 3 version of the Pulp Debian plugin, which we now fully maintain with some help from the Pulp community, but we maintain it. And yes, and because this was a complete rewrite and a switch in the database and requires a migration from the old database to the new database, it was something that blocked orcharhino at that version where you could still use Pulp 2 for a long time before the Pulp 3 was really ready. And now with orcharhino 6.0, we are finally ready to say upgrade orcharhino to a version where it uses this new Pulp 3 based backend. And so because of the long time it took for that to finish, there are many new features that come in with orcharhino 6.0 as well. But with respect to this backend switch, ideally, the users don't really notice much of this at all because it is a backend component. But of course, because it's so different, there are some changes that you will notice from the front, and also because there's such a long time of additional development between the old version and the new version, and so all these new features come in now that we upgrade.
Okay, so how many years did you work on Pulp 3?
I should have looked it up. I didn't look it up again, but I remember recently we went back and looked at the date on the very first commit in the Pulp 3 Git repository, and I think it was maybe 3 years ago or something like that, but I'd have to go back and double check. Of course, okay. That was the very early stages where initially, I mean, it went through various phases of more intensive and less intensive development since then.
And you already maintained Pulp 2, the Debian integration as well.
So the Pulp 2 version of Pulp Debian wasn't originally written by ATIX, but so it already existed with some features, but ATIX added some major features to that and basically took over maintenance for that already as well. Yeah. And then Pulp 3 was almost entirely written by ATIX and former ATIX employees.
Okay. Yeah, so that sounds really cool, and it sounds like Pulp 3 was a really huge step for the development team, since if you worked for 3 years in parallel with maintenance, adding some other features, writing some plugins, adding some customer wishes to Orcharhino, and all those things, you probably had enough to do in all this time.
Just looking at the list of features that Orcharhino supports, all of those operating systems and hypervisors and cloud deployments and bare metal deployments, I'm not worried that we will run out of work anytime soon.
Yeah, and if not, there's also customers and consultants like me who have ideas what we can implement as well, or where we could improve things. Okay, so I think we are almost at the end, but we have one question from the audience, and someone asked, since we have now Ocarina 6.0, where we have some huge backend changes, what are the next big changes on the roadmap of Ocarina?
Okay, yeah. It's again a good point, because of course with the Pulp 3 work that took a long time and bound up a lot of resources, some other priorities had to be priorities lower. And now that Pulp 3, or the switch over to Pulp 3, is almost done, all of those resources are freed up. And we go into a new stage of development of the Pulp plugin there. And the next thing that will be happening, and that is coming towards us, is upgrading the base OS that Orcharhino runs on from EL7 to EL8. So right now you can run Orcharhino on Oracle, Linux, RHEL, and CentOS, all EL7. And the next thing that we are working on is to make it run on EL8 instead. And normally that would already require, again, quite a lot of testing and stabilization and testing upgrades and so on. But this time is even more, because it's not a normal situation, because of course CentOS 7 has sort of stopped or reached its end of life, and we will not be going to CentOS 8. So in addition to just the EL7 to EL8 upgrade, we will need to find a way to port Ocarina machines running on CentOS 7 to either Rocky Linux or Alma Linux, and then 8. And yeah, so that will be the next big project going forward.
Okay, so you still have some big projects, some smaller bug fixes,
but
probably
we will continue, of course, in parallel to the normal Ocarina releases, in the sense of, I mean, we're doing infrastructure automation and deployment, right? And that's a constantly moving world. So every now, like, you support Debian, and every now and again there's a new version of Debian coming out, and then you need to support that. And there's a new version of Ubuntu coming out, new version of SLES coming out. So we will always continue to do that. And but we will also always have one, I guess, big next project that is our...
It can be even more complicated if something like Ubuntu changes how to install Ubuntu in an automated way, because they switch from pre-C to auto-install,
so
or something
that's
like that.
Another example for this. Well, we live in a constantly evolving IT world, and you cannot stand still. So there's that constant background churn and maintenance that you have to move along with, and then there's also some big projects that you want to work on to improve the whole thing in the long run.
Yeah, so I think this is a good message to end this session, because everything is changing really fast, and in the end you need some way to automate things to have time to keep up with all those changes. And this is where Ocarina can help you. And thank you for your time, and to talk about your work and what Ocarina development and engineering means, and that it's in the end something different to have an Ocarina than to have just Foreman Catalog painted in green, because you have someone who takes care of support and to have a stable environment with tested upgrade scenarios and simplified installation methods.
The difference is many hours of work to make it more stable and easier to use and upgrade and maintain and provide support for it. So yes, thank you as well, and thanks to all our viewers, and until next time, maybe.
Yeah, since we don't have any questions, I would say we come to the end, and then to everyone who is new at those at this event, this happens monthly, so the next one will be in 4 weeks, and then again it will be more about features of Orcharhino with also a short demo where you can see how Orcharhino looks like and things like that. So until then, have a good time and thank you for
Thank you very much.
being with us. Bye.